Top world diplomats rushed to Geneva on Friday amid rising hopes for a long-sought deal on Iran's nuclear program, but warned there were still major obstacles to overcome. After cutting short a Middle East tour to attend the talks, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry struck a note of caution as he joined his British, French, and German counterparts who had converged on Geneva.
I want to emphasize there are still some very important issues on the table that are unresolved. It is important for those to be properly, thoroughly addressed. I want to emphasize there is not an agreement at this point in time.
The talks, which started Thursday, were meant to have ended late Friday, but officials said they would be extended at least until Saturday. Friday night, the lights were still burning at the building hosting the talks. It was also announced that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov was expected to arrive in Geneva on Saturday, raising further hopes a deal was in the works. Marc Burleigh is a correspondent for AFP, and he is just returning from his assignment as news editor for their bureau in Tehran, and he joins us late this evening from Paris, France, via Skype. Marc, thanks so much for being with us. I do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Seems like they're mixed signals. You know, we heard reports that there was a possible deal that was close, and perhaps that's why Secretary of State John Kerry rushed to these talks. Now the talks have been extended for another day, at least into Saturday. So do you interpret these to be good things, encouraging signs, or not so?
Well, to put it bluntly, you don't get a whole lot of foreign ministers rushing to talks like this unless something is about to happen. That doesn't mean that it will happen this weekend, but it means that we are obviously very, very close. The talks up to now have basically been handled by political directors who handle all the technical issues. But when it comes to actually announcing a breakthrough, that's up to the foreign ministers. So to see the American, the British, the French, and the German foreign ministers rushing there, and there's some suggestion even the Russian foreign minister might be going as well, that really suggests very, very strongly that something is in the offing, that they're very close.
Yeah, it would seem, but it's probably tempered a little bit by history. We'll all remember back in 2010, then Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's government had agreed in Geneva to ship Tehran's entire stockpile of uranium to a third country, and then, of course, that fell apart. So this might be a replay of that, of getting just so close and then no deal.
Well, there are some things that have changed since then, of course. President Ahmadinejad is no longer in power. He's been replaced in June by President Rouhani, who is relatively a moderate. And Rouhani has come in and he's obviously changed the tone and possibly even the substance of what's happening in the talks. They're talking about some sort of deal. We don't have any confirmation of what the details of that are because they've kept it secret. Oddly enough, that is very encouraging in itself because there are hardliners in Iran, and it has to be said in the United States as well, that would not like to see a deal happen. So to keep this secret is a way to make talks progress without the sort of scrutiny from media and from hardliners. And so with a moderate president who seems to be pushing very strongly for a deal behind closed curtains, there's a great deal of encouragement. There's a great deal of expectation that something could happen this time.
And speaking of hardliners, Marc, let's talk about a couple of them. First of all, from what you hear in your reporting, how much support does Rouhani have from the Ayatollah Khomeini? Because he, again, of course, is a central figure in this.
Yeah, well, Iran is often described as a dictatorship. It's not quite like that. To a degree it is, but you've got like 5 different poles of power. But at the very top of the pyramid is the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. And he has given his full backing to Rouhani. This carries some risks because there are some hardline elements in Iran, particularly the Revolutionary Guards and other groups in parliament who do not want to see a deal with the United States, which he calls the Great Satan, under any circumstances. But by giving his backing to Rouhani, that's the strongest backing possible for a deal to be made.
Yeah, and speaking of those who don't want to see a deal be made, the one entity on the whole other end of the spectrum would be Israel. Is it possible that Israel could derail a deal?
there are many ways that Israel could step in and cause trouble in this. Israel has sympathizers in the U.S. Congress, of course. It's a military power in the Middle East. You've got a whole lot of action happening in Syria, where Iran is involved as well, which is just over the border from Israel. There are many ways that Israel could seek to sabotage this, but of course, the White House, President Obama, will be having to use all the influence he has to keep Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in line, to make sure that he doesn't step over a line and ruin what may well be the high point of a decade of diplomacy with Iran.
And how are these new rounds of talks, as well as the possibility of easing sanctions, playing in the public there in Iran? You were just in Tehran. How's that playing with the residents?
What's interesting with the sanctions is in Iran, polling is really, really unreliable in Iran. They for obvious reasons, but the idea that we get from the polls, and certainly the idea that I had from speaking with Iranians, is that they're not blaming the United States for the effects of these sanctions. They do put quite a large degree of the blame on the policies of the Iranian regime. Now, to a degree, a lot of that is put back on the shoulders of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who's no longer in power, and he will be quite a handy scapegoat if things change. But ultimately, the responsibility lies with the supreme leader. And if he has changed his mind, which by all suggestions it looks like he may have, then things could really come along. There's a degree of optimism with the Iranians, but they've seen so many times things coming to a head where they thought life would get better, only to be hammered even harder. They've never had it, I think, as hard with the United States as they have at the moment. I mean, price of chicken has gone up 5 or 6 times. Rice is incredibly expensive. Pollution has hit records. Even China would be devastated by. It's a very tough life in Tehran because of the sanctions. But the blame is more put onto the regime than onto the United States.
All right, Marc Burleigh reporting for us from Paris, France. Thank you so much, Marc. Do appreciate it.